Are mixing and mastering courses actually worth it? Some people hope that behind the paywall there's that secret for a pro sound, and those people blindly spoon-feed on tutorials without making any progression. Others won't pay for information they consider freely available, but then when they're left to their own devices, fail the discipline required to curate and put together that information into practice. Ultimately, everybody wants to improve and not be burnt. I have a conflict of interest, a course available called Mastering for Producers. So I've removed my course creator hat to consider my experiences having bought the following courses. Now, for all the things I learnt in some of these courses, which were amazing, I've also wasted some money on some of them and not completed others. So while I remastered this single by Slab City, I'm going to answer the following questions. When won't a mixing and mastering course help you improve? The 3 types of people who should never take an online course. How to investigate a mixing and mastering course before purchasing. Which courses have I taken that I recommend and that are worth spending money on? And why I ultimately chose to make my own mastering course. So now let's jump into this session and have a listen to this mix. The main thing for me in that mix, which I felt like there could have been a little bit more breadth in, was in the kick drum. You've got the sustain underneath that kick drum, but the punch coming out of the speaker compared to where the snare's hitting doesn't feel like it's just not hitting me in the chest. I think that's the best way to put it. It's just not smacking me right there. Okay, so the sustain of that 808 is down at like 50 hertz, but that punch is around 140 hertz. And it's quite isolated on its own. So we might get away with just using a simple EQ. And I'm going to set this EQ slightly later in the chain. I'm going to use the 432 Sontec. I just like using it. There's not too much visual aid. You've got the frequencies, the gain, and then your ears tell you the rest. So I'm going to head up 140. I'm going to go pretty narrow. And we're going to see how this starts to change that sound of the kick. Mainly, I'm focusing on that punch coming out of the speaker. Oh, and I like aggressive mode a little bit more because some of the harmonics are a little bit more pronounced in aggressive mode. Just going to loop that. It's catching a bit of the fundamental in the snare, so I'm going to try 120 hertz. Two dB is probably quite a bit. Let's try 1.5. I'm going to go half a dB on the sustain. So we sort of split the difference, because I did like the amount of punch it gave when it was a 2 dB, but when I backed off to 1.5, it feels a little bit more in balance with the original mix, obviously because it's less of an effect, but I still want to get that separation away from the sustain of those 808s. So maybe doing a half dB low shelf and a 1.5 dB boost instead of a 2 dB boost will just shift that difference a little bit better. Let's have another listen. You know what, I'm going to go big or go home. Let's go 2 dB. And then if we don't like it later down the track, I can always tone it down. Now, I know it's a little bit too excessive at 2 dB, but I'm hoping as we start to drive and push and everything gets squished back together, it sort of rebalances that out. I'm not super confident in that decision, but as we go through it, we'll see how this master pans out. So while my ears rest from looping that kick drum, I'm going to answer when won't a course help you improve. Now, there are 3 gaps I recognize, at least in terms of what affects the output of the work you're doing in the studio. And they are a knowledge gap, an experience gap, and a quality of music gap. Now, 2 of these gaps, of course, probably won't help. The first one is a quality of music gap. Shit music in or shit productions in is going to really limit what you can do on the output in terms of your mixing and mastering. And this is something I've just experienced as I've went on in my career. The more experienced people I work with, the more experienced producers, the higher the budgets, the better the pedigree of the work, the better the output. It's just as simple as that. That doesn't mean I can just be lazy about things. It just means that I have access to projects which are allowing me to exercise my knowledge at a higher level to produce better results. And no course is going to replace that. Now, if you're a producer or a musician yourself, it's something that requires a bit of humble pie to recognize, because a lot of people put the blame on the mixing and mastering to solve the musical and production issues. And no mixing and mastering course is going to fix, or the knowledge you get from that isn't going to fix a production or music gap that exists. Simple. That's the first gap a mixing and mastering course won't help. The second one is an experience gap. You can read a book, okay, on how to make a pizza. You can learn the steps, you can follow the steps, but having the experience of baking 1,000 pizzas in an oven or working on a line as a chef is completely different to reading a recipe book. So as much knowledge as you consume, how much experience are you giving yourself to put it into practice? And that's really important, because a lot of people have a great, vast amount of knowledge, but they don't have the experience. So another course isn't going to necessarily help you get that more experience. It's just going to expose you to more knowledge, but you still have to put in the reps. So experience and quality of music gap are 2 things which courses can't help. The one it does help is knowledge gaps. And it's important to identify when you are interested in a course or you're interested in closing a knowledge gap is the type of knowledge gap it is. Is it a broad knowledge gap? So is it mixing in general? Like you need a 101 course on mixing because you don't know how to mix at all. Or is it a narrow knowledge gap where it's, I need to learn how to tune vocals, specifically tune vocals, or specifically edit drums. Now, I'll let you know, for myself, closing narrow knowledge gaps is one way I've used courses. The Pro Tools tutorials in Pure Mix really helped me get my chops up in Pro Tools. The hip hop mixing course by Matthew Weiss really helped me develop my sensibilities for working in that sense, and also 2-track to vocals. And that's another course he offered, which I did because it was a very niche, narrow knowledge gap, which I didn't have a great amount of knowledge in. So I took those courses in order to further myself, and they helped and they were valuable to me, and it wasn't a waste of time or money. Now, let's get back into this. That kick drum, I'm going to rest on the decision I made and then come back to it later, because I don't want to get into this analysis paralysis where I'm just tweaking one thing half a decibel up and down until something magical happens. It's just typically not how it works. So let's have another listen and get a feel for where we're moving with this. Two little things. So you got that lead, it's very raspy, distorted, which I love. I love the sound of, but it's feeling a little bit pocketed in the mix there, as in pocketed. It's not sitting right up in your face aggressive, because the fundamental of the snare and where the hi-hats are sizzling away at have a lot of space to work in, so they're super clear to hear. But the upper mids of where that lead is sort of just kicking back a little bit too far for my ears liking. I want to sort of have that pop out a little bit. So let's go back to our EQ actually, because we might be able to do something here. Actually, yep, I know what I'm going to do. I know exactly what I'm going to do. We're going to get Dyne 1, and we're only going to control that upper mid band and blend it in parallel. So all these other bands I don't really care about. All I care about is finding that upper mid band where the lead is, compressing it, and then slowly blending it back in, almost like a dynamic EQ, but in parallel coming back into itself. And I'll show you what that sounds like or looks like. It's not going to be that band. We're going to go up a bit. have a listen. I'm just going to place that after the EQ, because in the EQ, I want to do 2 cuts here. I want to do one to the low mids where that snare fundamental is, and one to the top end where those hi-hats are. Let's have a listen. I was wondering why that was setting weird, like I was still on solo or something. This had popped up to 0. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why. Let's have another listen. I'm liking that. There's a lot of clarity in that, which the other one doesn't have. Take a listen to this on loop. One thing I do like is the sustain in that kick. So I'm going to get rid of this low shelf. I like that. I like that quite a lot. That's actually really cool. So far we've clicked a few of the peaks, but the main sort of thing is this boost here to the kick, this one here, 120 hertz, and then this sort of tuck around the upper mids by getting a bit of that fundamental of the snare out, a little bit of those hi-hats, and then in parallel boosting the upper mids to get that clarity out of that lead. And that actually sounds super clean, super clean. Quick before and after. I think what we can do is we can start to fill out the side signal a little bit. But before we do that, I'm going to answer the question of the 3 types of people who should just never take online courses. The first one is if you believe you need to pay to play. If you believe that course is a silver bullet solution, that if you pay to play, your life is going to be so much better and you're going to be so much better at your job. Don't, because you're placing the responsibility on the pedigree of that course to change what you ultimately are responsible for, and that is putting things into action. And that's the second thing, pay to play, but you're all ideas and no action. You like the concept of learning new things. You like the concept of the course or the way it's sold to you, but you're not willing to put in the actions. Don't be one of those persons. Don't buy the course. And the third thing is FOMO. It's similar to pay to play, because pay to play is the desire to learn something which is going to help you. And FOMO is like, am I missing out? Like, if I don't buy this, FOMO. And I think FOMO is the worst, or fear of missing out, is the worst way to make a purchasing decision. When you buy a course, when you invest in your education, you want to make a level-headed and conscious decision and measurable decision about if something's going to help you or not. So when it comes to buying courses or investing in education as an engineer, if it's based on FOMO, it's best to just lock up your wallet and not buy, or take 72 hours away from that sale that you got in your inbox. And if it was worth it so much, you're happy to pay full price, you can do it in 3 days' time. Otherwise, hold your horses. Okay, those are the 3 types: FOMO, pay to play, and all ideas and no action sort of people should just not be buying courses. Or if you're feeling that way when you're looking at a course, just don't buy it. Simple. Now back to the master. Everything's really punchy, good clarity. It needs a bit more thickness or weight in the sides. I got my Meta plugin, which I made, the ultimate stereo widener. I won't need to use all the I won't need to use all these parameters. I just need to get rid of that, get rid of this. I just need this Hornet's harmonics, just add some saturation to the side signal here. Probably don't need that much, but we'll just play it and see how we feel. It's subtle, it's nice. Something I'm noticing though, as I'm bringing out some of that width and we've exacerbated a bit of that top, as soon as I brought this the original into AB, I'm liking the sustain in the lows. As punchy as I've made things, it's lost a little bit of that character because it affects the pacing of the rhythm a bit because of that sustain. It's boom, 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 rather than... And yes, I still agree with my initial decision. It needs to be punchier, but the sustain that we've lost, it's losing that weight a little bit. Even though things are clearer, some of that weight is compromised, and I did get rid of that low shelf, but it's still not there. So I'm thinking we're going to just play with a bit of parallel here on the subs to bring things into focus. So let's do that. That's a bit more true to the original, that lumpy sustain, which is nice. We've got the additional punch, we've got the additional clarity. I'm happy with that, and I'm going to answer the next question. So how do you investigate a mixing and mastering course before buying it? The first and most easiest thing to do is find the curriculum. Skip the sales copy. Even if you're looking at one of my mastering courses, skip the sales copy, go straight to the curriculum. And the reason why is the curriculum is going to inform you of the knowledge gaps that it's aiming to fill. You can look at the different lessons that are on offer, and you can really ask yourself, does this help me achieve what I'm after? Does this fulfill a specific knowledge gap? I had really narrow knowledge, as in I had very narrow knowledge gaps which I needed filling, like drum editing, vocal tuning, operating particular functions in Pro Tools, and the way I was organizing my sessions, just understanding my key commands better. That really helped me strongly. So actually going on the Pure Mix platform, going through all the different courses they offered, and seeing those made it justified in my head, because I'm like, I need to learn those skill sets. And the reason why I needed to learn them is because I could identify that it would save me time to learn these skill sets. There was an ROI on learning those skill sets. So the money spent came back in return as valuable time and money invested in taking those courses. The next thing to do is, when you're investigating, is not just look at the curriculum, but also look at the free content those educators provide. The way they present their information, their knowledge, they teach, does it resonate and connect with you? Are you getting something out of the free content they either offer on YouTube or on their Instagram or on their TikTok? Do you find it interesting? Does it appeal to you? That's really important, because part of learning is about being engaged. And if they don't engage you and you're just bored shitless while you're watching it, well then it's probably not worth spending the money. Doesn't matter what sort of promises they give. If it's boring on the free stuff, the paid stuff might not engage you as much. And finally, ask a friend, ask your peers, give them the idea. Hey, I'm thinking of buying this course, or have you tried, or have you been on this platform before? I did that. And again, we'll keep going back to the Pure Mix example, because there's so many different things which played into me purchasing that annual subscription. And that was actually because a friend of mine, we were talking, and they're a professional who've worked with some big names, suggested, Nick, the way you engage with stuff, I really think you'd enjoy Pure Mix. You're a good learner. You enjoy things that go in depth and are detailed. You'd really enjoy it. And I'm glad I took their advice, because I really did. Now back to this master, because I'm starting to enjoy what we're doing here. between manipulating the EQ and some of this upward compression stuff we're going on here, I think we're getting close. I think we're getting close to a final sort of sound for this master here. I'm considering using the limiters this early on is because everything's pretty together, and then as I push it, it might expose some things which I feel need tightening. Now, I'm going to do a double limiter stack here between the vintage limiter and the maximizer. The vintage limiter is going to give me the loudness in analog, and the maximizer is going to control the peaks. So let's dial that in. See what I'm listening for there in the delta is, actually, I'll let you listen to it as I do it, but if the threshold's too high and it's taking away too much, you can hear that it's losing some of the low end in that delta signal. And I don't want that. I want the low end to stay open and moving. So I'll go back to 7.3 where I felt was the sweet spot, but then I'll dial it more and more so you can hear the effect of what that limiter's doing and why I don't particularly like to have that much sub getting sucked out by the limiter. I like that. That's an all right spot to be in. Getting good loudness, I'm getting everything, but the one thing that's breaking up under this compression is the low end. You can hear that low end break up, and I want to put a low shuffle and just duck all the low end, including the snare hits, but the problem is the top end's quite bright. So I got a lot of top end, got a lot of bottom ends. How do we manage this? I'm just sort of like trying to think, like you can boost the mids, then you bring the limiters down, or we can sort of sculpt the low end, sculpt the top end a bit with an EQ. It's important we get this right. Now, I know I've exacerbated some of the low end in order to get that feel, and I want to keep that feel. It's important. Like we can be technically right about this and just go here, get rid of this parallel and be happy, but because it's technically right, it's not distorting anymore, but it doesn't have that same big bombastic low end we need, and we need big bombastic low end. It needs to be big and loud, so we need to think. That's part of engineering, is thinking of solutions to problems. And the problem is the low end's distorting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another 432 because I can have 100 of these and not have to spend 15 grand each time. But what we're going to do is we're going to bring the low end down 1.5 dB and get a feel for what that. You know what? I'm not going to do that blindly. Let's have a listen, and we'll tweak whether we like 50 or 100 hertz better, and then we'll do a high end shelf as well on the top end and see what we can get working here. So before we start finalizing this, I want to answer the question, which courses would I recommend you go out and buy? Which ones can I put my name behind and say, this was money well spent? Anything Matthew Weiss does. I've purchased 7 of his courses. Most namely, I think was just stupendously well put together was the Mixing with Reverb course, the Mix Through Pop course, mixing 808s, mixing 2-track to vocals. All of them are really good, but those ones really stand out in my mind as having techniques which I've since adopted and continue to use in my own mixing practice. Another one is Pure Mix, and I'll explain to you my experience with Pure Mix because I had an annual subscription. Pure Mix is like, whenever you open up a video, it's like going to somebody's studio. So if you've ever visited your friends' studios or went around your local area and visited studios, you always kick back, you always listen to tracks, you always share trade secrets in terms of like, this is how I go about doing this, or have you seen this piece of gear, or this is how I mix this record. That's what Pure Mix is like, but with professionals from all around the world who are really acclaimed. You get to go on there and see how they mix stuff, and it feels very conversational. It's not pragmatic, educational, hi, this is how you mix a kick drum. It's like, hey, this is this track I did with this artist, they were over here, we were doing this, and they were doing that, they said this, and this is like, there's so much context, it's very context rich to the actual sessions that it walks you through. So it almost felt like I was accessing these conversations that I was already having with studio owners here in Melbourne, but worldwide, and seeing it put together in an educational way. So Pure Mix is something I can definitely recommend. My Mix Lab by Luca, Luca Predalesi is my Mix Lab. The thing that I think is really cool about it is that each of the videos are very narrow. So there's not a lot of wide, broad knowledge gaps it's filling, but very narrow and quirky in the sense that you get to see Luca's quirks to how he mixes, how he uses Pro Q3 or Pro MB, or how he uses his own plugins which he puts out. And I think he's just got a really quirky way of mixing that I almost get like an entertainment out of it, because he does things which you wouldn't think of doing, and then you're like, you really do that with an EQ, or you really do that with a compressor, and it works, and it's a cool learning experience because it gets you questioning or thinking about different ways to use things or use processes when you're mixing that you otherwise wouldn't think about. But now let's get to finishing off this mix, and then I'll tell you why I even made my own mastering course to put out to the world. As we've brought the mix forward, we've done a lot of processing, and when you're pushing it, and especially when you're limiting it, that processing will do one of two things. It's going to stand up on its head and make everything sound amazing, or it is going to be crumbling and absolutely getting, I didn't want to say that, but that's just the one word that came to my mind. It's just going to be absolutely getting... fucking horrible. And this is what I mean. You gotta A, B, and you gotta make sure you don't go backwards, and the limiting completely destroyed what I was doing. It worked on a technical realm, but creatively, I think it's taken way too much away from what's going on. I don't like that. Maybe bring that up, see what happens. It's just not extending. It's not going down low, and I'm not a big fan of this. This isn't actually sounding good. And this is what happens. You go to master something, you have your best intention, and things don't sound good. And you got to manage that, and you got to battle it. And I'm not going to cut this out because, fuck, it's happening, and you got to learn how to deal with it. And that's part of mastering. Not everything is cotton candy and beautiful. So let's have a listen. Let's get a feel for what's happening here. What I've done there is I've just backed off the amount of compression on that parallel channel and boosted it up a couple dB. Sure. That could be enough. because it was compressing more than 12 decibels, almost 13, 14 decibels. Just backing off the amount of compression in that parallel might bring things in. Oh, and also I got rid of that top end cut, but left the low end one, the low shelf at 50 hertz down a decibel rather than 2 decibels, because that was quite extreme. I knew it was extreme when I was doing it, but we're going to forego the technicalities for the feel of the master and see where it takes us. Let's go. Okay. Good. Now, let's have another listen. I can't decide off such a short listen. Let's do proper listen. Make sure we're fucking Gucci, because I'm half. I'm half. I'm not fully convinced. You got to listen and listen and listen again. So that hit there. Uh-huh. Do a bit of transient emphasis. Let's have a listen there. All right, so I'm not sure what my camera cut out there because the card filled up. Who the fuck knows? But I got this to a point where it sounds really good, and the reason why is because of this low mid cut here. Remember, I wanted the upper mids to shine a bit, so what I did was I made a little duck to the fundamental of the snare, so there was more presence in the upper mids when I did the parallel compression. I did a whole decibel, but then I shifted it back up, so it was only taking off half a decibel, not a whole decibel. It made a world of difference. So before we play the before and after, I have to answer the question, why did I make a course? Why did I make a course on mastering? Well, the reason why is there was a gap in the market. The gap in the market was there are a lot of how to master EDM courses and tutorials online and this, that, the other, but they only show the how and the what. How do you master an EDM track? This is what you do. Get EQ, boost low end, get limiter, slam limiter, done. And it's just like, how, what? That's, I took those courses and I wasn't not throwing shade. I was like, well, that's not going to really help students. Students can do how and what 100 times over, but it doesn't help them answer why do you get an EQ? Why do you get a particular type of compressor? Why do you use a multi-band compressor? Why do you do this? Why? The why is really important. Why are sessions set up in a certain way? So that was my catalyst. It was my driver for doing the course. And then I pushed Sam at EDM Prod. I'm like, dude, we've known each other a long time. I want to kill this. I absolutely want to create something that just slays. And by slay, I meant not just explaining why on my terms and my knowledge, but challenging my knowledge by doing further research, getting references in each of the videos, so that way people could see where the origins of what I'm discussing were from. So if they wanted to, if they're that so inclined, they could go check out the references, check out the AES references, check out the ITU references, check out the books that I was referencing, check out the engineers I was referencing, or the tools or the technologies, because for me, education is just a gateway. So it's a gateway to the knowledge in there's a gateway to more knowledge. So yeah, that's why I created that course. But you guys have been sitting there for a while waiting for the final result on this master, this Slab City master. We're going to go before and after. Before is the bottom, top is the after. They're level matched as best as possible. Now let's get into it. So you guys might have struggled a little bit going back and forth to hear the differences. There were some subtle ones, but the beauty of that is the fact there was such little differences between the mix and the master, except the only difference is the master is 6.5 LUFS integrated. which is super loud, but we haven't lost the punch. We haven't lost the clarity. We haven't lost the depth, the original intention of the mix. And that's a beautiful thing in mastering, as much of a struggle that was to do. That was pretty hard. I can't remember it being that hard when I mastered it. Maybe it's just because, maybe, you're in a video, you're trying to, I don't know, maybe I just was off my game. Usually, I'll listen to something like this and smash it out of the park. Today, it sounds great. Great master. But it was a little bit of a struggle there, as you saw. But that happens. Not every day is perfect. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, take care.